Hello readers, today we're going to talk about an incredible novel which first came out in English translation in 1952 and has since then become a modern classic. And today many people consider it one of the best novels of the 20th century. I'm talking about The Tartar Steppe by the Italian writer Dino Buzzati. This novel first came out in Italian in 1940 under the title Il deserto dei Tartari. I read it in Italian, which I'm very proud of, but the novel is of course also widely available in English translation. The prose is gorgeous, and I hope that that also comes through in the translations. You will find links to different editions in both English and Italian in the show notes for this video. And let me remind you that if you buy any books from my links, I will receive a tiny commission, so you will be supporting my channel without having to pay anything extra. The first thing I want to say about The Tartar Steppe is that it is written in that deceptively straightforward, pared down style that makes it easy to read, but its themes go very deep. I think it might be a good idea at this point to summarize the plot quickly. The plot of The Tartar Steppe is incredibly simple, so let me just give you a brief outline. Of course, if you would like to skip this part of the video, just look at the show notes below for the timestamps for the next section. So Giovanni Drogo is a young man fresh out of the military academy who gets posted to a remote fort that looks over the Tartar desert. As soon as he gets there, Drogo is given the chance of going back to the city or perhaps moving on to a different post. But he's also advised to stay there at least for a little while. And although he does not think he will stay there for long, Drogo will spend the rest of his life at the fort waiting for a great war to take place. At some point, Drogo leaves the fort temporarily and visits the city, only to find that everyone he used to know has now changed. Drogo realizes that he does not belong in the city anymore, so he also realizes that his life would only have any meaning if he went back to the fort and was able to prove his usefulness the day that the barbarian hordes finally tried to invade. After several decades at the fort, the Tartars finally attack, but still, Drogo is not able to prove his mettle because he becomes ill and is dismissed. I think that if I had to say in just one sentence what The Tartar Steppe is about, I would say that it is a novel about the meaning of life. Not that you're going to find the meaning of life by reading the novel, obviously. What I mean is that this novel talks about how important it is for most people to believe that their lives have meaning. Drogo starts the novel as a young man that probably doesn't have much time to wonder about the big questions. I would not think that the meaning of life was something that preoccupied young Drogo at the beginning of the novel. However, after he goes back to the city briefly and sees how everyone else in his life has moved on by getting married, having children, etc., he realizes that his life has no meaning. So he goes back to the fort because that's the only place where his life could make any sense. But there he must deal with frustration because nothing happens. For much of the novel, we get the sense that Drogo is wasting his life by staying at the fort. The isolated martial environment that Drogo spends most of his life in does not really allow him to form a family. So Drogo is one of those solitary figures that we find in existentialist novels, and I would say that The Tartar Steppe is clearly an existentialist novel. I think it is easy at this point to think about Kafka, for example. Drogo is the kind of character that could only exist in a novel written in or after the 20th century. I think what is so painful about Drogo is that he's not aware that he's squandering his life. We can sense that his quest for a heroic feat and meaning will never really be fulfilled. I would say as well that this novel demands some imagination from the reader, mostly because its setting is so abstract. We know that there is a city where Drogo is from, and then of course most of the novel takes place in this fortress which overlooks a desert. Now, what country this is, or in what period we should imagine the novel taking place, is completely left to the reader's imagination. Depending on the kind of reader that you are, this could give you the opportunity of having a fun reading experience, or a frustrating one? I confess that I had to Google the term Tartar for any clues as to where this novel was meant to take place. What I found out was that Tartar is an umbrella term for different ethnic groups that originate in Central and Northern Asia. So it is a very imprecise historical term, but it is still used today. And according to Wikipedia, there are millions of Tatars living in Russia today and hundreds of thousands living in nearby republics and in Turkey. But I'm afraid that doesn't illuminate much about this novel. My feeling is that Buzzati probably just wanted to use a blank term for these barbarians that would ring a bell to most readers but wouldn't mean anything too specific. Regardless, I imagine the story taking place in Europe, but it could be said anywhere, really. The Tartar Steppe is fascinating in that it also shows us how human beings are adaptable to different environments. We could see a clear contrast between Drogo's behavior and his attitudes at the beginning of the novel, and then compare those to the attitudes of other characters who had already spent many years living at the fortress by then. And we can also see how Drogo changes psychologically, conditioned by the rough environment that he spends most of his life in. All the men at the fortress, and Drogo is no exception to this, want to be heroes, whatever that means. But the repetitive and banal nature of their daily lives could not be further from what we, at least I imagine, great heroes do. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that this novel is about military life, because I don't think it is at all. I think that the Tartar Steppe speaks to us because it reminds us of what most of our lives are actually like. So if you have a 9-to-5 office job, or if you work in retail, pretty much most people's jobs have elements of repetitiveness and could seem even pointless most of the time. And this is something that this novel reflects incredibly well. So I empathized with Drogo from the first line of the novel, not because I am a soldier or have ever been a soldier or have any interest or experience in the military, I don't, but because I have done jobs in my life where one of my first thoughts upon getting it was, when am I going to be able to leave and do something else? I even had a manager once who said to me that when you apply for a job, you should always be thinking about your next job after that. I guess that was meant to be some kind of career advice. And it is very clear to me from the beginning that Drogo does not want to stay at the fortress for one day longer than he needs to. But then, like jobs that I have had in the past, and perhaps you had too, Drogo ends up spending a lot longer doing that job than he expected. I know that in his case this is taken to dramatic consequences, but I am sure that most people watching this video and reading the Tartar Steppe have felt like that at some point in their work lives. You know, a lot of people put up with crap at their workplace in the hope that one day the Tartars will invade, meaning the day when something will happen that will make all that soul-killing work routine finally worth it. So many people spend their lives waiting for something better to happen, and it doesn't even have to relate to work necessarily. It could be any situation or circumstance that we don't like, but perhaps makes us feel comfortable, or we're too scared to change, or we're just too used to. So we keep doing pretty much the same thing day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Time flies even when you're not having fun. And one day you look back and you realize that you have wasted a monumental amount of time. You know, perhaps the mistake is expecting that something incredible is going to happen one day, although perhaps that is what keeps us going. What do you think? And that is why I said earlier that this novel could only be written in the 20th century or after, because it talks about a malaise created by a way of life that only became generalized in the last 100 years or so for most people. So I'm not saying that people's lives were not pointless or dull before then, but I think keeping alive and providing for your family was more important than thinking about those things. But Drogo has no family, remember that. I mean, there is his mother, but he's isolated from everyone that he used to know before going to the fortress, and he never gets to form his own family. Drogo is not a loner only because he lives in the company of other men, but that still is not enough to imbue him with a sense of meaning. All he has is the hope that one day the enemy that no one seems to have seen will show up and attack. The Tartar Steppe is a short but intense read, and I recommend it to everyone. So please let me know your thoughts, and I will see you again in my next video. Bye!